Hello everyone, it's Mrs. Hinde-Taylor, ready to read chapter 7 of Half a King. In the last chapter, Prince Yarvi was at the funeral of his father and brother, and now he's setting sail to get his revenge for their deaths. So, chapter 7, Man's Work. Every wave born of Mother Sea would lift him, roll him, tug his sodden clothes, make him twitch and stir as if struggling to rise. Each wave hissed back out would drag the body down the beach and leave it grounded, tangled hair stuck with froth and sand, limp as the knots of seaweed on the shingle. Yarvi stared at him, wondering who he was, or had been. Boy or man, had he died running or fought bravely? What was the difference now? The keel ground against sand, the deck shuddered. Yarvi stumbled and had to clutch at Hurrick's arm to steady himself. With a clunk and clatter, the men unshipped their oars, unhooked their shields, and sprang over the ship's sides into the surf, sullen at being last to land. Too late for any glory or plunder worth the taking. Crewing the king's ship would have been a high honour in King Uthric's reign. No honour at all in King Yarvi's. Some men took the prow rope and hauled the ship past the floating corpse and higher up the beach. Others unslung their weapons and hurried towards the town of Amwend. It was already burning. Yarvi chewed at his lip as he made ready to clamber over the side with some shred of kingly composure, but the handle of his gilded shield twisted in his weakling's grip, tangled with his cloak, and nearly dumped him face first in the brine. God damn this thing! Yarvi tugged the straps loose, dragged the shield from his withered arm, and flung it away among the sea chests of the men sat on while they rowed. "My king," said Heimdall, "you should keep your shield. It's not safe. You've fought me. You know what my shield's worth. If someone comes at me, I can't stop with sword alone. I'm better off running. I'll run faster without my shield. But my king—" "He is king," rumbled Hurrick, pushing his thick fingers through his white streaked beard. "If he says we all put aside our shields, it must be so." "Those with two good hands are welcome to theirs," said Yarvi, slithering into the surf, cursing as another cold wave soaked him to the waist. Where sand gave way to grass, some new-made slaves were roped together, waiting to be herded aboard one of the ships. They were hunched and soot-smeared, wide eyes full of fear or pain or disbelief at what had surged from the sea and stolen their lives. Beside them, a group of Yarvi's warriors diced for their clothes. "Your Uncle Odin asked for you, my king," said one, then got up frowning and kicked a sobbing old man onto his face. "Where?" asked Yarvi, his tongue sticking in his mouth. It was suddenly so dry. "On top of the holdfast." The man pointed up towards a dry stone tower on a sheer rock above the town, waves angry about its base on one side, a frothing inlet on the other. "They didn't close the gates?" asked Heimdall. "They did, but three of the headman's sons were left in the town, and Odin slit one's throat and said he'd kill the next if the gate wasn't opened." "It was," said one of the other warriors, then chuckled as his number came up. "New socks!" Yarvi blinked. He'd never thought of his smiling uncle as a ruthless man, but Odin had sprouted from the same seed as Yarvi's father, whose rages he still carried the marks of, and their drowned brother Uthil, at the memory of whose peerless swordsmanship old warriors in the training square still came over dewy-eyed. Sometimes calm waters hide fierce currents after all. "A curse on you!" A woman had tottered from the line of slaves. As far as the ropes would allow, bloody hair plastered against one side of her face. "Bastard king of a bastard country, may Mother Sea swallow." One of the warriors cuffed her to the ground. "Cut her tongue out," said another, jerking her back by her hair, while a third drew a knife. "No!" shouted Yarvi. The men frowned at him. If their king's honour was questioned, so was theirs, and mercy would not do as an explanation. "She'll fetch a better price with her tongue." And Yarvi turned away, shoulders chafing under the weight of his mail, and struggled on towards the holdfast. You are your mother's son, my king," said Hurrick. "Who else's would I be?" His father's eyes and his brothers used to glow as they told tales of past raids, of great deeds done and grand prizes taken, while Yarvi lurked in the shadows at the foot of the table and wished he could have taken a man's part in the man's work. But here was the truth of it, and a place on a raid did not seem enviable now. The fighting was over, if there had been any worthy of the name, but still it seemed Yarvi laboured through a nightmare, sweating in his mail and chewing at the inside of his mouth and startling at sounds. Screams and laughter, figures darting through the wriggling haze of fires, smoke scratching at his throat. Crows pecked and circled and cawed their triumph. Theirs was the victory, most of all. Mother War, mother of crows, who gathers the dead and makes the open hand a fist, would dance today, while Father Peace hid his face and wept. Here, near the shiftless border between Vansterland and Getland, Father Peace wept often. The tower of the Holdfast loomed black above them, the noise of waves crashing on both sides of its foundations loud below. "Stop," said Yarvi, breathing hard, head spinning, face tickling with sweat. "Help me out of my mail." "My king," frothed Heimdall, "I must object." "Object if you please, then do as I tell you." "It's my duty to keep you safe." "Then imagine your dishonour when I die of too much sweating halfway up this tower. Undo the buckles, Hurrick." "My king." They stripped his mail shirt off, and Hurrick threw it over one great shoulder. "Lead on," Yarvi snapped at Heimdall, struggling to fasten his father's clumsy golden cloak buckle with his useless lump of a hand. Too big and too heavy for him by far, and the hinge all stiff as he was stopped dead by the sight that greeted them beyond the open gates. "Here is a harvest," said Hurrick. The narrow space in front of the tower was scattered with bodies. So many that Yarvi had to search for patches of ground between to put his feet. There were women there, and children. Flies buzzed, and he felt the sickness rising and fought it down. He was a king after all, and a king rejoices in the corpses of his enemies. One of his uncle's warriors sat beside the entrance to the tower, cleaning his axe as calmly as he might have beside the training square at home. "Where is Odin?" Yarvi muttered at him. The king gave a squint-eyed grin and pointed upwards. "Above, my king." Yarvi ducked past, breath echoing in the stairway, feet scraping on the stones, swallowing his surging spit. "On the battlefield," his father used to say, "there are no rules." Up and up in the fizzing darkness, Hurrick and Heimdall toiling behind him. He paused at a narrow window to feel the wind on his burning face, saw water crash on rock at the bottom of a sheer drop and push down his fear. Stand like a king, his mother had told him. Speak like a king, fight like a king. There was a platform at the top, propped on timbers, a wooden parapet about the edge no taller than Yarvi's thigh, low enough to bring the giddy sickness flooding back when he saw how high they had climbed. Father Earth and Mother Sea spread out small around them, the forests of Vansterland stretching off into the haze of distance. Yarvi's Uncle Odin stood calmly watching Amwend burn, columns of smoke smudging the slate-grey sky, the tiny warriors bent to the business of destruction, the little ships lined up where the surf met shingle to collect the bloody harvest. A dozen of his most seasoned men were around him, and kneeling in their midst a prisoner in a fine yellow robe, bound and gagged, his face swollen with bruises and his long hair clotted with blood. "A good day's work," called Odin, smiling at Yarvi over his shoulder. "We have taken 200 slaves and livestock and plunder and burned one of Gorm's towns." "What of Gorm himself?" asked Yarvi, trying to catch his breath after the climb. "And, since standing and fighting have never been his strengths, at least speak like a king." Odin sucked sourly at his teeth. "The breaker of swords will be on his way, eh, Hurrick?" "Doubtless." Hurrick stepped from the stairway and straightened to all of his considerable height. "Battle draws that old bear as surely as it draws the flies." "We must round up the men and be back at sea within the hour," said Odin. "We're leaving?" asked Heimdall. "Already?" Yarvi found he was angry. Tired and sick and angry at his own weakness and his uncle's ruthlessness and the world that was this way. "Is this our vengeance, Odin?" He waved his good hand towards the burning town. "On women and children and old farmers?" His uncle's voice was gentle as it always was, gentle as spring rain. "Vengeance is taken piece by piece, but you need not worry about that now." "Did I not swear an oath?" growled Yarvi. For the last 2 days he'd been prickling whenever someone used the words "my king." Now he found he prickled even more when they did not. "You swore. I heard it and thought it was too heavy an oath for you to carry." Odin gestured at the kneeling prisoner, grunting into his gag. "But he will free you of its weight." "Who is he?" "The headsman of Amwend. He is the one who killed you." Yarvi blinked. "What?" "I tried to stop him, but the coward had a hidden blade." Odin held up his hand, and there was a dagger in it, a long dagger with a pommel of jet black. In spite of the heat of the climb, Yarvi felt suddenly very cold, from the soles of his feet to the roots of his hair. "It shall be my greatest regret that I moved too late to save my much-loved nephew." and carelessly as cutting a joint of meat, Odin stabbed the headman between his neck and his shoulder and kicked him onto his face, blood welling across the rooftop. "What do you mean?" Yarvi's words came shrill and broken, and he was suddenly aware how many of his uncle's men were all about him, all armed, or all armoured. As Odin stepped calmly, so calmly towards him, he stepped back on shaky knees to nowhere but the low parapet and the high drop beyond. "I remember the night you were born." His uncle's voice was cold and level as ice on the winter lake. "Your father raged at the gods over that thing you have for a hand. You've always made me smile, though. You had been a fine jester." Odin raised his brows and sighed. "But is my daughter really to have a one-handed weakling for a husband? Is Getland really to have half a king, a crippled puppet dangling on his mother's string? No, nephew, I think not." Kindle snatched Yarvi's arm and dragged him back, metal scraping as he drew his sword. "Get behind me, mate." Blood splattered in Yarvi's face and half blinded him. Kindle fell to his knees, spitting and gurgling, clutching at his throat, black leaking between his fingers. Yarvi stared sideways, and Sir Hurik frowning back, a drawn knife in his hand, the blade slick with Kindle's blood. He let Yarvi's mail drop jingling to the floor. "We must do what is best for Getland," said Odin. "Kill him." Yarvi tottered away, his jaw dropping wide, and Hurik caught a fistful of his cloak. With a ping, his father's heavy golden buckle sprang open. Suddenly released, Yarvi reeled back. The parapet caught him hard in the knees, and, breath whooping, he tumbled over it. Rock and water and sky spun about him, and down plummeted the King of Getland, and down, and the water struck him as a hammer strikes iron, and Mother Sea took him in her cold embrace.